Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're continuing down the list of the 50 best horror movies that you've never seen, with number 43 for us, but number 35 on the list, Hatchet. Hatchet came out in 2006 and was written and directed by Adam Green. And this is a movie I was so excited to shoot a video for. I watched this back last year and absolutely fell in love. I would probably say it is my favorite on the list. Further down the line, we'll go to the movie Pumpkinhead, which has been a movie I grew up watching, which I do love, but Hatchet just hits all of those perfect horror movie checkpoints for me, and we'll get into that later. But for a quick synopsis of the movie, Hatchet is about a young man named Victor Crowley who was born horribly disfigured and kept locked away by his father, who was the sole caretaker. During an unfortunate fire caused by a couple of kids throwing fireworks at Crowley's house, Victor was trapped in a burning house and his father was trying to save him. While attempting to cut down the door with a hatchet, he accidentally strikes Victor in the head, killing him almost instantly. This causes the father, Thomas, to die of heartbreak essentially, as Victor was the only part of his family he had left. And then from there, the story grew that you could still hear Victor Crowley crying out for his father, and that the swampy lands that his house resides on are Victor's forest, and that you shouldn't go in there unless you have a death wish. The movie takes place in Louisiana, and Victor Crowley's house sits in the middle of a swamp. No one is allowed to go into that part of the swamp just because of the different mysterious deaths that have been occurring. They decided to just close it off. But a father and son duo decide to go in there to try to hunt some alligator, as they presume that it would be easier to hunt gators in a place that there aren't other boats. While the two are out in the middle of the night hunting, the father pulls over the boat to go use the bathroom, and after a few minutes of not responding, the son goes after him to find his father dead, and then the son gets attacked by the presumed monster. The next day, we focus in on two kids, Ben and Marcus, who are celebrating Mardi Gras. Ben, after going through a bad breakup with his girlfriend of 9 years, isn't really feeling it and decides he wants to go on a haunted swamp tour. And Marcus, feeling bad that his friend is so upset about everything, decides to go with him. There's 8 people in total on the boat: an old married couple named the Primatos, a aspiring film director named Shapiro and his 2 actresses, Ben and Marcus, and then another girl, Mary Beth. The tour guide takes them through the part of the swamp that has been closed off to the public, as it is Victor Crowley's swamp area. And during the tour, the boat does end up crashing and starts to sink, and because they're in alligator-infested waters, they go onto the land, and Mary Beth, who is the only local, says that we have to get out of here. This is Victor Crowley's forest. Now, of course, everyone thinks that this is just a story. The tour was a ghost tour where they talked about Victor Crowley, so everyone's kind of like, oh, that's just lore. You don't really know what you're talking about. Ben is the only one in the group who realizes that Mary Beth's the only local and might actually know what she's talking about. So he tells her to tell the story, which is where we learn of the tragic backstory of Victor Crowley. And she says that the house we passed earlier in the tour was not Victor's house, as it's always been presumed, and that his house was right behind them. They turn around to see the abandoned house in the forest and start to immediately panic as they hear what they believe to be the crying of Victor calling out for his father. The rest of the movie is pretty self-explanatory. Everyone gets picked off one by one by the deranged Victor Crowley, who they assume to be dead, but is kind of like a paranormal being. He's sort of like a ghost with a vengeful spirit almost, and they aren't sure how to stop him. They try multiple times to kill him, but really only knocking him out for a short period of time, and the only survivor at the very end is Mary Beth. Now, as I said, I loved this movie when I watched it last year, and I was just as excited to watch it again when I did last night. This movie just hits so many good points to me. Even just being a 2006 movie, it's very reminiscent of the 80s. Although this movie was shot in 2006, it is like the perfect callback to 80s horror slasher films. And as you may or may not have noticed, those are some of my favorite films, so this movie really, really excited me. Adam Green, the director and writer, had one big rule on set: no CGI. Every single effect in this movie is practical. The only CGI done in post-production was to take out simple things like cameras that might be in shot or wires used during some of the scenes, but every single bloody, gory scene we get happened in real life. And that, I think, is the very first thing that I really loved about this movie, because I'm such a practical effects person, that this movie just, there's blood splashing trees, he twists someone's head off and pops it off like it's a cap. It's just beautiful. Beautiful practical effects in this film. And another gold star I can give to this movie is the callbacks to other horror movies. The very first characters we see are the father and son going out to hunt the gators, and Samson, the father, is played by none other than Robert Englund, who, as you may or may not know, plays Freddy Krueger. So right there in the first like 5 minutes of the movie, we get an old horror movie icon. And when Ben and Marcus are going around trying to find who is the one that does the boat tours, they run into someone named Reverend Zombie, who's played by none other than Tony Todd from the Candyman movies. So, in case you're not keeping track, that's now 2 classic horror movie icons we have. And then fast forward to when we get to Victor Crowley, who is played by none other than Kane Hodder, who plays Jason Voorhees. So that is 3 horror movie icons we have in this film. That's all practical effects. It is just like the perfect melting pot for a movie that I'm going to love. Now, don't get me wrong, I do understand why this movie is on this list. The dialogue has a couple of moments where it's a little bit cheesy. Ben's character I go in and out with because he just got through the 9-year breakup with his girlfriend and he doesn't shut up about it. On the bus ride over to the boat, he's sitting next to Mary Beth and just going on and on about his girlfriend, and Mary Beth is like, I'm really sorry, but I don't care. And I'm kind of in the same boat too, like I don't really care. Ben kind of seems like oblivious that he's bringing everybody else down and no one wants to really hear about his problems. But he still ends up being like one of the last characters that we follow through this movie, so he is a pretty good protagonist. I do like him as the hero figure. I think it's just one of those things of like the hero having some tragic thing happen to him before he has to like, you know, buck up and go fight. So there's definitely points in the movie where I'm like, okay, I get it. I understand why this wasn't like as big as it should have been. But I still don't understand why this movie isn't more well known. It is very reminiscent of 80s movies, and a lot of the articles I found, people thought it was supposed to be like a remake or like a remastering of a movie or, you know, like a sequel to something, and it just isn't. It's a movie just created by itself and for itself, and it gives us a great horror movie slasher with Victor Crowley. And the movie does have 2 sequels, Hatchet 2 and 3. Hatchet 2 coming out in 2010 and Hatchet 3 coming out in 2013. And the first movie ends kind of abruptly. It ends with Ben and Mary Beth thinking that they've escaped and they're on a boat back to shore, and they stop in the middle of the lake and are kind of just like, you know, decompressing. Mary Beth found the bodies of her father and brother, so she's kind of processing that. Ben watched his best friend Marcus get killed, so they're both kind of mourning and grieving, and Mary Beth falls into the water. She had like seaweed wrapped around her legs, so she's stuck like at the bottom trying to get out, and Ben's like, you know, calling for her, and he reaches his hand in the water and she grabs it, and when she gets pulled out of the water, she realizes it's Victor, who had ripped Ben's arm off and stuck his arm in the water, and like she screams, he screams, and then it cuts and it goes to the credits. So it's very like, oh, it's over now, and you don't really know if Ben and Mary Beth lived. You're assuming Ben's gonna die because his whole arm got ripped off and he's like bleeding out on the boat. But we don't actually see Victor attack Mary Beth, so you're kind of just left with like, okay, are they dead or what's happening? But Hatchet 2 and 3 are just a continuation of that story from the moment that scene ended. It's only supposed to be over the course of a couple of days, following Mary Beth and her just trying to stop Victor once and for all. Now, we don't really learn how to kill Victor in the first movie. I had to look into that, and I do plan on watching Hatchet 2 and 3 just because like I want to watch them back to back if this is supposed to be such a good, like, you know, flowing movie sequence. But Victor Crowley is a paranormal being. He is just technically a ghost. He's seeking revenge. The kids that caught his cabin on fire, which caused his father to accidentally kill him, and his father died of grief and just heartbreak 10 years later. And from what I've read, the only way to kill Victor is to return his father's body to him, which obviously doesn't happen in the first movie, but apparently in the third movie, Mary Beth does bring his ashes to him, and that does kill Victor. So he's a paranormal being who has an ability to be killed, and it's something that we really haven't seen before. Like, most iconic 80s slashers like Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers have lived through like literally 10 movies worth where they just don't die, and you can shoot them as much as you want and they don't die, but you never really learn what kills them. And I really like that this movie has a set goal of here's how you kill this paranormal slasher. And like I said, I do want to watch all 3 back to back. So far, I've only seen the first one. I have not seen the other 2, but it is definitely on my list. But Victor Crowley is a great slasher. He is like superhuman strength. He only kills one person with the hatchet, and it's Mr. Permeato. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I don't really remember. He ends up getting his leg bit by an alligator when trying to get off the boat, and he sees Victor Crowley's house, and him and his wife are like, you know what? Someone has to be living there. We're gonna go see if we can get help. And as they're going to the house, Victor comes out with the hatchet that his father put through his face and hacks the guy's like shoulder and cuts him in half, like diagonally from like the shoulder down the torso, and we see him like pull apart his body and like throws off the ground, and everyone's like, oh my god, and everyone freaks out and screams and runs. And then he goes after the wife, who she is definitely my favorite death of the whole movie. The effects in it are just like fantastic, and it's one of the craziest deaths I've ever seen. Like, it had my heart rate elevated while watching it. I was so just like, ah, it's so great. He grabs her, she's trying to run away, and like takes like one hand and grabs her bottom jaw, and then like grabs the top of her head and pulls her head apart by like ripping her jaw open. Like, oh my god, that's I think the third real death we get to see, and that's what you gave us. Beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. I loved it. And with like the father and son in the beginning, we don't see what happens to the father really, but we get to watch the son get ripped in half. So we know that Victor is not opposed to splitting people in two. So now 3 of the 4 deaths that we've seen have been people getting like cut or pulled apart, and now they're in like 2 halves, and it's just like, it's a level of practical effects that you don't really see anymore. And it just gets me so excited because you know that all happened in real time. Those actors watched him pull apart that person's jaw. It's just incredible. It's just absolutely incredible. I definitely want to get this movie on DVD because I want to watch all the behind the scenes and the director's commentary. I couldn't find too much of that stuff online, so I do want to be able to like sit down and watch the movie with the commentary on, and I want to see all the behind the scenes stuff because this movie is just, there's so much you can tell was put into it, and it was very well thought out, storyline and just like shooting wise. I think Adam Green really killed it with this movie. You can definitely tell he was inspired by old 80s horror movies, and it's like he took the best parts of those and put them together to make this. And I would be honest with you, I think Victor Crowley has a better storyline than Jason Voorhees does. If you think about it, in the first Friday the 13th movie, Jason isn't even the killer, it's his mom. And it's after his mom dies that he like resurrects and starts killing people. But even then that movie has a flaw because if you remember in the first Friday the 13th, Jason was only like 7, 8, he was a little boy when he drowned in the lake, and his mom was the one killing all the camp counselors for letting her son drown. And then the next movie takes place 5 years later, and Jason comes back to avenge his mother, but Jason is like a 35-year-old man. So even those movies, there's a little bit of disconnect with the story. This movie is very much, we know what our story is going to be, and that's why I'm excited to watch the 3 movies back to back, because it's supposed to be over the course of a couple of days. It's not trying to draw it out. It's not trying to make it into like a multi-million-dollar slasher franchise. It's really just, here's the story of Victor Crowley, and we're going to tell it how it should be told, which is something that you just don't get anymore with horror movies. It's very much like, we made this really cool movie, and it made a lot of money, so now we're gonna make a bunch more. Like, we're seeing that with the Insidious movies. They were really cool in the beginning, but now you can tell it's just kind of like a cash grab, and the movies are losing quality. And that's why movies like Hatchet should be more in the forefront, because those are the movies with original stories and trying to have a good storyline versus just trying to make a quick buck. And in this movie, we get 11 deaths. Pretty much everyone in the party gets killed. Mary Beth is the only one who does survive. So Victor has a good body count for just the first film that we're seeing him in. It's just fantastic. The blood, the gore, the effects, I could just, all of it. I love all of it. And I definitely think this movie deserves to be on the list. It deserves to be way more well known than it is. I definitely recommend everyone go out and watch this. It's one of those slasher films that you can watch and be scared, you can watch and have a good time, you can show it to people. It's just all around a great movie. My boyfriend doesn't like horror movies and he'd watch this one again. Like, that's how great this film is. But I am interested to see what you guys think. Have you seen this movie? And if so, do you think it deserves to be on the list? You can leave a comment down below or head over to my Instagram, What a Horror. I'll be making a post about this video as well. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more videos. I put out new videos every Friday. And until next time, stay spooky.